As a reminder, there will be no Board of County Commissioner action taken today. It is a workshop, and we intend to close this down at 6 o'clock. Previously, the board had expressed concern over the number of complaints that came in during the summer, specifically with regard to beach vending at various locations. And at that time, the board tasked the Tourist Development Council to having a workshop and come up with some proposals to address the issues that had arisen. Tonight, we want to try and address some of those issues. We're looking for answers to questions. We're also looking for some suggestions. So I would ask that there's a number of 3x5 cards that are coming around. If you've got a question or if you've got a suggestion, please write it down and turn it in. If during the proceedings something strikes your mind that gosh, I wish I had asked that, raise your hand. We will have a card passed to you so you can write down your thoughts at that time. Since this is a workshop and not the hearing, we're not going to take public comments. We're going to work off of what's submitted on the cards, because when this comes before a Board of County Commissioner meeting, at that point in time, we'll let people make their comments known and for the record. But we want this to proceed so that we get as much information out there to answer the questions that have arisen, and at the same time do it in a logical and orderly fashion. So with that, Mr. Bagby, I'm going to turn the matter over to you to start answering a series of questions you've already received.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Commissioner. Mr. Chairman, so far we have 28 questions that we've received prior to today, and I think we've given you all copies. We'll answer all 28 of those. We just received several questions from another one of the commissioners. We'll answer those immediately thereafter, and then we have about 25 cards we've already received. We will answer those in the order. And so we will take suggestions. We have had some submissions that had suggestions on how to, with proposed changes to the ordinance. We'll read those also if time permits on the questions or after the questions, so people know what's being considered. So without further ado, I think we'll go ahead and start with the question session. The first question we received is there a limit to the amount of beach vendors, the amount of beach vendors may use at public accesses? And currently the answer to that question is no. Vendors are like anybody else, they can use as much beach as there is, to include the front along the water line, which seems to be one of the main questions. Can there be a limit or some way to leave room for tourists and visitors to supply their own waterfront chairs and umbrellas? There can. That would require some kind of change or a beach management plan in the ordinance. The second question is, vendors complain about Turtle Watch, but isn't Turtle Watch performing a state mandated function? The answer is that yes, they are performing a state mandated function. In the past, I believe, as part of the beach nourishment project in the West, we were actually required to fund their study, their survey, or whatever, and under the proposed habitat conservation plan, we would also be required to do that. My understanding technically is we're not required to fund it now, but it is a state required function that they do perform for the state. So the short answer to that question is yes. Number 3, beach chairs and umbrellas are being set up before 7 a.m. along Miramar Beach near the whale's tail. Are there really that many beachgoers that early in the morning to justify the proliferation of vendors, chairs, and umbrellas?
The answer to that question is it's a standard business practice of the beach vendors to set up early in the morning. One reason is to get their product out there for their people that have rented the chairs. Another one is they claim heat exhaustion from their workers if they don't do it early in the morning.
And then the next question is, does the county license those vendors who set up on private property?
Yes, all beach vendors are permitted through the Planning and Development Division with the county. So yes, all beach vendors that operate on Walton County beaches are permitted.
Then for Jeff, what is the amount of fine for violating beach ordinances? Follow on is, are there repeat offenders, and what consequences do repeat offenders face?
The standard fine for each beach violation is $100. There's glass, dogs, early setups, that type of stuff. There's a $75 fine for driving on the beach at Grayton after the allotted time, and there's a $200 fine for driving on the beach without a permit. Most everything falls in the $100 category. Are there repeat offenders? There are repeat offenders. It's not rare to find people that violate more than one time. And then the consequences to repeat offenders face, those fines increase in $100 increments. The first violation's $100, the next one's $200, and then $300, and so on. It caps at $500 maximum.
Are there beach sharing compromises that can be offered to enable vendors to make money, but also allow those who do not wish to use vendor services to enjoy the full use of the beach?
Currently, there is not a plan, but we feel like that if there is a request for services, then there would be an associated beach management plan that would set up how the beach is used by the particular beach vendor.
What recommendations for change are proposed? And you might want to
Okay, included in the handout was an outline of the recommendations we made upon the request of the BCC. It's fairly extensive. I hope everybody's had a chance to read through it. The basic changes that we're asking for is there be some sort of segmenting of the public beach areas that then can be put out for a request for services proposal, and then the beach vendors in our community can bid on those areas, and then they would have the exclusive right of that area. By doing that, we feel that we can then manage that beach vendor better and have it set up so that everybody that comes to Walton County that wants to enjoy the public beaches has equal use of the public beach. I have a couple of different options outlined in the first part of the outline, which is listed as beach vendor management, beach vending operations, section 1. One of them is no change to the current setup. The other one is one beach vendor. Don't recommend that. The other one is an assortment of 1 to 5 vendors or one vendor per designated area. There's still some mechanics to be thought through on that process, but we feel like that by putting it out for bid, we can then control the vendor that is servicing that beach, better servicing the public for those who want to use beach vendors and those who do not want to use beach vendors.
Next question is, how will the proposed changes affect daily operations of my beach vending company?
Without knowing the current daily operations of all the beach vendors, I can't satisfactorily answer that question. The beach vendors that have particular place permits, which are for a specific location, it's not going to affect them at all. The beach vendors that have delivery permits that currently vend on our public beaches, mainly the regional beach accesses, and on some of our neighborhood beach accesses where there's space that permits it, theirs will be affected somewhat, depending on how successful they are on bidding on the projects, if that is the direction you tell us to go.
Why not punish the few offenders more heavily and leave the rest law-abiding offenders alone?
We feel that the ordinance should cover all people who choose to have vending services on our beach.
My customers pay good money for waterfront seats. Why should I deny them that privilege?
The public beaches should have equal access to all, not necessarily the ones that can afford to pay for beach vendors to set up early in the morning and monopolize the front part of the beach.
Are the setup times proposed to change?
Currently, in our recommendations, we have a change from 8 a.m. to 7:30 a.m. or after the beach has been cleared by the Turtle Monitoring Association. We did that based on the fact that the texting program reveals that typically the beaches are cleared between 6 and 6:30, and so 7:30 did not seem unreasonable, and a good compromise between the 8 and the 7 that was requested.
How many beach vendor complaints were received in 2014?
Unfortunately, at the beginning of the season, we did not have an adequate mechanism in place to catalog and quantify all the complaints we received. Of course, we received complaints from visitors, locals, beach vendor against beach vendor. The ones that I was able to tabulate through emails, approximately 64 complaints, phone calls, personal conversations, code enforcement officers being stopped on the beach for conversation. Like I say, unfortunately, I don't have the exact number of all the complaints we received. Most of you were recipients of the complaints that I received via email, and I'm sure some phone calls. There's been passed around several ratios of complaints versus chairs, complaints versus vendors, complaints versus number of days in the year, and I understand those ratios. But the number one ratio is that we had approximately a dozen beach vendors that received the majority of the complaints, and of the, we have 42 vendors of 2014, so that's a dozen out of 42. That ratio is fairly high. Simple fact is that we do have an issue on our public beaches. And there needs to be some revisions made that is fair and equitable to all concerned, meaning the businessman as well as the visitors or locals that come to our beaches.
What is the most frequent complaint about beach vendors?
The most frequent complaint we received associated with the public beach accesses was the monopolizing of the entire waterfront of the beach. In other words, the vendor or vendors would come down and set up all the way across what we call the rack, which is where the waves crash onto the beach. And our ordinance, current ordinance, has some ambiguous verbiage in it that says indicates there should be some aisles left for people to access the water. However, that's not the practice. And it's hard to enforce because if beach vendor A gets there and he sets up and he leaves some spaces, beach vendor B comes by and he sets up and takes up the spaces, we don't know who was there first because we're not there all the time. So the biggest complaint is monopolizing the beachfront at our public beaches and not giving the later visitor to the beach proper access to the water or the ability to enjoy the water.
Okay. Have any changes been proposed for the turtle monitoring program?
No changes other than the proposed change in start time to 7:30 a.m. versus 8 a.m.
What are the details of the proposed bidding process for the RBAs? The details for...
Skip number 15.
Oh, I'm sorry. Will the proposed changes govern both private and public beaches?
Generally, our recommendations are associated with the public beaches. There are a few slight revisions to the ordinance that might affect people that set up on private beaches, mainly start times and stuff like that.
What are the details of the proposed bidding process for the regional beach accesses if those changes are adopted by the Board of County Commissioners? It would follow the same process as any request for service or a request for a proposal. It would go out. We looked at both Bay County and Okaloosa County. They use different methodologies. For example, Bay County has a single beach vendor, which they probably don't wish they had now for their public beach accesses, because when you have one that big, if they're not performing the standard, it's almost impossible to replace them. So there would be a notice go out and invite people. There would be an intake briefing. We would follow basically the county process for requests for services. Then there would be a selection committee or a recommendation committee, and they would bring that back before the Board of County Commissioners, and that contract or contracts, plural, would be approved depending on what option, if any, that the Board of County Commissioners chose. If the proposed changes are adopted by the Board of County Commissioners and include no vending at neighborhood beach accesses, what will be the process for reporting illegal vending at neighborhood beach accesses?
Beach Code Enforcement receives complaints by phone, email, and we're setting up a portal on our website to receive written complaints. People can log on or go to our website, pull it up, similar to a contact us type form, fillable form, and it will be sent to a code enforcement officer. We will use the resources that we have to research and investigate the complaints that we receive.
And if the proposed changes are adopted by the Board of County Commissioners and include no vending at neighborhood beach accesses, what will be the penalty for vending at neighborhood beach accesses?
The penalty for vending on beach accesses, they'll follow the same guidelines that we're operating under right now. They'll be notified that there's been a violation, and then we'll issue the citations from that point forward, starting with $100 and going up.
And if the proposed changes are adopted by the Board of County Commissioners and include no vending at neighborhood beach accesses, who will respond in a timely manner to cite the violation of vending at neighborhood beach accesses?
Once again, we'll use the available resources we have to investigate and research all complaints that we receive.
The county code of ordinances states that the TDC's general duties are to make recommendations to the BCC. How does the TDC have authority to regulate and enforce ordinances in small businesses? That's true, and all we're doing is making recommendations as directed by the Board of County Commissioners, who, based on the number of complaints you received last summer, told us to bring back any recommended changes to the beach activities ordinance. The second part of that, the authority to regulate and enforce ordinances, the Board of County Commissioners established, I want to say 2012, prior to 2012, the beach code enforcement and placed it within the Tourist Development Council. They have the responsibility of enforcing the codes affecting the beach as directed by and as approved by the Board of County Commissioners. How can the implementation of the 5-strike rule, and just so folks know, the 5-strike rule in one of the proposed changes is after your 5th violation, you're basically, your permit is revoked. How can the implementation of the 5-strike rule be justified when it is currently being governed by the TDC enforcement agency, which clearly employs officers that do not follow the ordinances that are currently in place?
The second part of the question statement is incorrect. Our code enforcement officers are certified. They follow all the rules and regulations of the county. So I'm not quite sure how to answer that question satisfactorily, other than we're following all the rules and regulations. We have proper certifications.
Mr. Chairman, where did the 5-strike rule come from? Why did you settle on 5?
My memory is it came up, Mr. Chapman, a couple of years ago, that there had to be some limit. At some point, there had to be a limit where, and I believe it was going to be up to the county administrator, but I don't remember who actually proposed that number. It was more than 3, because I think it was felt that 3 was too few, because when you're dealing with 16, 18-year-old kids out there setting up chairs, they're going to make mistakes. But they thought that a higher number was too many. At some point, the beach vendor had to be responsible for their employees or their subcontractors or whatever their relationship was. So it was, I don't know that there was any mathematical determination or number. It was just more than 3, I think, is basically where it came from.
Well, if my understanding is correct, the first time they interact, code interacts for a violation, it's a warning, correct?
Yes.
Can't cite immediately, you got to give a warning and act and get corrective action.
Well,
and then you got up to 4 more times with a particular vendor before he's really put in jeopardy of losing whatever he's doing out there.
Yes.
I didn't do that as a cop, I can tell you that. Not that many.
Yeah. Well, we also, is subject to the fines that increase in $100 increments. So there is a monetary penalty associated with it.
What is the justification in allowing a director of trust development to revise county ordinances? We're not revising county. We're making proposed recommendations as directed by the Board of County Commissioners. You can accept some, reject them all. We're just trying to do what you told us to do. Why has the TDC neglected to implement the vendor application revisions that made by Attorney Davis in 2014? That's you. Trying to answer.
The revisions to the application will be incorporated into the 2015 vendor year.
The application was already out there in 2014. Why has the TDC neglected to form a committee that includes at least one vendor as directed by the Commission in late 2013? We brought all the vendors in. We didn't bring just one vendor in, and we brought them all in or gave them all the opportunity to come in. I'll put it like that. In our postseason meeting in September, and we cataloged their recommendations. Much like some of the questions, we got more complaints about recommendations we had already received than actual recommendations. So, but a lot of them made good recommendations. Some of them have made some good recommendations tonight. And so that was the committee. We, instead of bringing 5 or 7 people in a room, we had probably 40 or 50 people in this room right here garnering recommended changes.
I think what the question is asking you is, I was in that meeting, but I think what they meant is when you sat down to do these revisions, at that time, why didn't you have a representative from the vendors, a representative from Turtle Watch, so that we would have input from all that are involved? I think that's what this means, okay, as opposed to one big meeting where everybody hashed out everything.
Thank you.
Okay, and that's, Commissioner, we had that committee meeting. We just had 40 or 50 people in that committee meeting, and a lot of them were vendors.
But once you brought it past that point, and you brought it to actually sitting down with the ordinance and revising this and revising this.
That was Brian and myself with the minutes for the meeting.
And it would be very helpful to have people involved, all people involved, so that at that point they can, and it would be very helpful if commissioners were involved in, someone come around and say, hey, this is an ordinance and we're thinking about this and what is your input, and instead of, we bring this to tonight. But at any rate, we'll talk about that later.
Okay.
Thank you.
The definition of public as an adjective: open to all, notorious, open to common use, belonging to the people at large, relating to or affecting the whole people of a state, nation, or community, not limited or restricted to any particular class of the community. By this definition, what is the justification in prohibiting vending on all Walton County public beaches when all members of the public, whether paying for a service or not, should be treated the same? And rightly or wrongly, the people who don't use a vending service don't think that they're being treated the same, whether they are visitors or whether they are residents, because they don't normally get up at 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock and go down and set up their beach setup. In theory, they could, but most people don't want to do that on vacation or in the summer when they're living here. So that was again, I guess that's a determination to be made by the board on whether or not you want to regulate beach vending at all. That's not our determination. How do you calculate the value of any given beach regional beach access?
I took the opportunity to do a area study, and based on a conservative area of space needed for a setup, being 2 chairs and an umbrella, leaving an aisle in between, and then access aisles at certain intervals. Based on the geographical areas of our regional beach accesses, I came up with a matrix that is set at occupancy rate and at different vending unit prices for a setup. And it gives a matrix of what the beaches could be worth. The true value of the beach, if the Board of County Commissioners chooses to decide on a request for service proposal type format, would be the bidding process. I would expect all the beach vendors to calculate how many setups that they could effectively put on the beach in a managed way, what they would expect the occupancy rate to be, what their cost of doing business is, and reasonable overhead and profit. And that would be what their bid amount is, and that will be the true value of what a regional beach access is worth in the beach vending sense.
I'm sorry.
27.
How will you enforce the new proposed setup style, aisles between seats, etc.?
If the Board of County Commissioners chooses to adopt a service proposal format, included with that would be a beach management plan that would reflect how we would like it set up. Depending on the width of the beach is how many access aisles you have and how many setups in between access aisles you'd have. So if the services proposal format is adopted, it would also have an associated beach management plan. And that's how we would regulate it.
Over the years, vendors have built a relationship with their clientele that keep them returning to Walton County year after year. What is the justification in eliminating the locals as well as tourists' freedom of choice?
Well, I don't think we're going to be tearing down any relationships. We're not prohibiting beach vendors from vending. We're just simply trying to make it managed on the public beaches so that all the people to Walton County can have fair access to the beach.
In relation to beach access, can you give me an explanation why a member of the public, whether local or tourist, that uses a beach service is discriminated against by not affording them the same rights as the general public? After all, it is the general public that each vendor serves.
Well, Jim alluded to it earlier. The average visitor to the beach that doesn't want to use a beach vendor for their chairs and umbrella has to get down there at a public beach immediately after the turtle monitoring process is completed and prior to the beach vendor setting up. Because the practice that we experienced starting at the first of the summer season, meaning June, was that all of our regional beach accesses would quickly become monopolized by either one beach vendor or a couple of beach vendors. So it is discrimination. We feel that the general public doesn't want to get up at 6 a.m. To come down and set their beach chairs up that they're going to use at 10 a.m. So we feel that by a management process of the public areas that we can give everybody fair access to the beach. Like I say, we're not trying to eliminate vending on regional beach accesses. The neighborhood beach accesses typically don't have enough room for a vendor to set up. They're 10 to 20 feet wide. It forces the people to filter out east and west. And in more cases, that's in front of That's the beach in front of private upland property. Our current code actually states that the vendor has to have the upland property's authority, written permission to do that, and that's another thing that's difficult to enforce. So we don't feel like anybody's being discriminated against.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Excuse me.
Yes, ma'am.
So are you saying that all these sets that are being put out are rented, or vendors putting out sets that are not rented, which are in violation of our ordinance?
Well, that's a good question, Commissioner Jones. We feel that some of the sets are speculative. There's really no way for us to determine or enforce that, because the reason you get, and this is where the ambiguity in the code exists, the beach vendor simply has to put a name or a room number on the chair and claim that that is rented for that day. Doesn't mean the person has to come sit in it, because they have it rented for the whole week, and the beach vendor, in their mind, is compelled to set up the setup at 7 a.m. in the morning and break it down at dusk. So there's no way for our code enforcement officers to say, is that chair rented or not? And so that's where the problem comes in. To answer your question, are there speculative setups? I believe there are. Or is there a way I can determine it? No, ma'am, there's not.
And just to piggyback on Brian's answer, Commissioner, one of the changes we considered was requiring the vendors to have people there. Of course, that would be cost prohibitive at neighborhood beach accesses, but at regional beach accesses, it probably would, because in that way, the chairs and the umbrellas didn't get set up. And this, I don't want to say it's an either or, but we looked at a couple of different options. Either limit the vendors at the regional beach access by space, or require that their customer actually be there before they can set up. That way, if their customer comes out at 2 and I come out at noon and I set up on the front line my own equipment, my own stuff, my own chair, then I get the front. Not because they paid somebody to come out and set up at 7, am I sitting 2 or 3 rows back from the front of the beach. There was pushback. I think you were at the workshop, or in later conversations, there's been pushback from vendors about having to have people physically on the ground where they vend, because then that kind of defeats the purpose of having the mobile vending permit, delivery permit, because they may only put 3 chairs down. And again, just to put this in context, we're only talking about public beaches. Out of the 27 miles or 26 miles of beach, we're not talking about that much beach. The regional beach accesses, I think, is about 8 acres, and then you get into the 10-foot wide or the 20-foot wide neighborhood beach accesses. You're not talking about that much space. So when people say, if we eliminated all the 10, 20-foot wide beach accesses, the right to vend there, as long as we kept the vast majority, because the regional beach accesses are the vast majority of the space on the beach, public space. Again, we have to differentiate between public and private. Public space, then that would be a consideration also. But there are 100 different ways to do this. The direction we got was to bring back some proposed changes, at least as a starting point, and that's what we did. In relation to beach access, we already did 29, 30. The ordinance requires all vendors involved in water sports to obtain life-saving training. However, the beach vendor checklist number 8, as well as the submittal requirements, both state lifeguard certification. Life-saving training and lifeguard certification are 2 very different certifications. Why is the vendor application not consistent with the county ordinance?
The vendor, the vendor application is handled by the planning department. It's different than, why it's different from the ordinance, I can't answer that question for you. I can tell you that when we approved the ordinances, when we approved the applications in the past season, if they were jet skis, that type of stuff, they had to have some sort of CPR type training is the one that we made sure that they had. We didn't look for the lifeguard, like Chief Talbert's crew. We made sure they had some sort of life-saving training, which was the CPR, AED, first aid type stuff, because they were dealing with people in the water. So as far as the permitting process and the ordinance, that's an administrative thing that just needs to get fell through the revisions.
Yeah, I think that's where the disconnect is. You have planning issuing the permits, but, and I think there should, to me, be a difference. Those that are doing the jet skis and that sort of thing, then I do think they have a responsibility to have lifeguard training. I mean, I even had it back when dinosaurs roamed the earth. But I'm not so sure that the boys setting up the beach chairs necessarily don't need lifeguard training. So I think there should be a difference there.
I agree that specific to the water sports was the breakdown, and it's one place it says life saving, the other place it says lifeguard. So,
and I know we've heard from some that say it's difficult to get it, but we need to find where it is and get these people certified. It is imperative. We all need to remember back a number of years ago when we lost 8 people on Walton County beaches. We need to have certified not only the lifeguards from the fire department, but we need to have as many certified people out there as possible.
Mr. Chairman, from an administrative standpoint, we'll check those permits, and if the language is not consistent with the ordinance, we'll be sure we get that lined up. And if you wish to change the ordinance at some point, we'll follow suit.
Okay. Next, I'm going to ask Ms. Sharon Maxwell to come up because there are a couple of questions here that involve her or her organization. Or you can go up there if you want to. You can go right here. Okay. According to FWC, the turtle survey period statewide is May 16th to August 31st each year. Why does Walton County season start May 1st and end October 31st?
That is part of the whole sea turtle season, nesting season in this area, Northwest Florida, is May 1st till October 31st. That's it. The beach monitoring that FWC requires from somebody who holds a permit is that we have to count for is May 1st till August 31st. In Walton County, we monitor daily until September 31st. And also, if there's a nest in the ground, we still have to check that nest daily. The numbers that were given were just for what the state calls index beaches. There are beaches all throughout the state that have special monitoring programs, and those are used to compile different things. But sea turtle nesting season is the same in Northwest Florida all over, and all the counties monitored from May 1st till at least August 31st. Another one?
Okay, well, you may have part of the answer here. According to sunrisesunset.willyweather.com, sunrise from May 1st to September 1st in 2014 was between 5:15 and 5:45 each day. The turtle zones are half-mile, thus giving more than adequate time for survey of nests by 6:37 a.m. At the FWC workshop, FWC officials recommended the best survey approach is at the break of sunrise. In order to properly survey, 15 minutes prior to sunrise is the best time for the Turtle Watch volunteers to arrive and begin their survey. If FWC is correct, then why did we set 7:30 a.m. for vending setup when the Turtle Watch volunteers have ample time to complete their task? So I'll give you first.
Okay, number one, the most of our areas are 45 minutes to an hour, not a half an hour. My walk is an hour and 5 minutes. What I do is, because I'm on the beach, when I get on the beach and I can see, I tell my volunteers to be there at 5:15 if that's the time. If it's 5:20, I tell them 5:20. because it changes throughout the summer, but it's based on facts because I'm there.
Okay, Brian, you want to answer the other half of the question?
Yeah. The texting program, we monitored it this year, all 18 zones, and the average clearing time at the first of the season when the sun rose earlier was approximately 6:05 to 6:15. And the code reads that the beach vendors can set up after the turtle monitoring process is complete for that zone, or 7:30 or 8 a.m. So in most cases, the vendors had the opportunity to set up, sometimes as early as 6 a.m.
Okay, next question is, wouldn't 7 a.m. be more amicable time for all concerned, especially the turtles, for vendors to set up? And I think we answered that. We all agree. Well, I will say we mostly agreed in the workshop. Obviously, I don't think the Turtle Watch folks necessarily agreed that 8 o'clock was too late. We talked about 7, and I think we just landed on 7:30 as a compromise to answer that question. If there is no law or indiscretion, as in the opinion of FWC, Ms. Tyndall, in vendors being Turtle Watch volunteers, then why don't we allow them to be South Walton Turtle Watch volunteers? And I'll ask Sharon to come back up to answer that part. Wouldn't this alleviate some of the South Walton Turtle Watch and vendor issues?
We've dealt with this over the years, and most of the agreement with FWC and FWS, because Fish and Wildlife Service is in this too because they're endangered species, and that is the conflict of interest between a vendor saying maybe not finding a crawl that's there. That's the only thing I can say. I don't think FWC, I don't know of any place that vendors are on a permit to do things. And just to clarify too, FWC says all of Turtle Watch's work is done by 9 o'clock. And as you can see, we even have nests moved by 7:30. So I will just say you have a good program.
Brian, you want to?
Nope, I have nothing to add.
Okay. Was a beach vendor or South Walton Turtle Watch volunteer included in the committee when making these ordinances revisions? Yes, in the recommended changes, again, there were 40, maybe more, 50 of us in the room going through. We asked what changes they wanted. And when in the actual drafting of the document, no, that was actually Brian, and maybe Brian and Jeff, I'm not sure. And then I did review it, and then it did go before the TDC, the recommended changes. So at their December 2nd meeting. And these questions refer to changes in the leave no trace portion of the ordinance. How will omitting tagging process help the issue?
Currently, the problem we run into almost on a nightly basis is when we work a section of beach and tag items, we'll find that we'll have 50 or 75 items in, say, 5 or 6 miles of beach. The following night, we could come back through the same section of beach because we have to go back to that same section of beach to see if there's anything that we tagged that's left. Well, then we'll find that there's nothing on the beach, or maybe 8 or 10 items, just a few items. Well, the following night, that you can go back down the same section of beach, and the stuff that you tagged 2 nights ago is back on the beach with your zip tie is still on it, that they've taken it off the night that they had the tag on it, but then the next night they leave it back on the beach again. So it becomes a repetitive process. You can check a section of beach, tag a bunch of stuff. You can go back tomorrow night, everything's gone. You can go back the third night, and everything's back on the beach again because they think that you have to tag it before you can take it. So they play the odds, and they get tagged 1 time a week. Then they leave it the other 5 nights, and everything's good. Well, it's just, instead of us covering 10 or 12 miles of beach in a night, we're stuck in the same hot spots, which is usually west into the county, the middle of the county, the going and tagging the same stuff every third night or whatever, so.
What does permitted items per existing code represent?
Was that?
Yeah, the second
Referring
one.
to the items that,
Yeah.
it says may be permitted to be left on the beach.
You can, for two different monsters here, people who own along the beach can get a permit to have a box or have a sailboat left on the beach up at the toe of the dunes, or have a box to have their own chairs in. They can get a permit to leave their stuff behind their house on the beach. Beach vendors can do the same thing on a site-specific location, and if they've got a resort that they represent, they can get a permit in their vending permit to leave boxes on the beach, to leave their chairs in. They can also permit, some of them have bonfire permits that they, where you'll see a bonfire that's left for a night or two because they've got consecutive bonfires, or they'll have volleyball nets that they can leave up at a specific vendor location that's on their vending permit. So if it's permitted in their vending permit, they can leave them on the beach overnight. If it's not permitted in their permit, then they have to come off every night.
Won't removing the accessibility of generators from the beach adversely affect the major source of income from weddings and receptions, along with special events, which often use music at these events? And have we had a massive amount of complaints from noise during these ceremonies and events?
I can't accurately respond to if it will affect their business or not. There are alternate ways of providing power to items that need electrical power on the beach. We did receive several complaints, mainly around Grayton Beach, associated with people setting up TVs and stuff, running them on generators on the beach.
How will requiring the approval of the BCC benefit the leave no trace on the beaches, especially since the special events permit process seems to be working smoothly?
Two different things. Leave no trace typically is what they consider typical beach use items. They're left overnight because the person did not want to carry them off the beach. Special events permits were set up to allow for events that are not specifically permitted on the beach, and it really doesn't commingle with leave no trace. If you have a special event permit, you have applied for and received approval from the permit authority, and you have a plan associated with it of how you're going to do that event on the beach and how you're going to clean it up and be off the beach.
And I'll piggyback on that, because one of the special events that people complained about more last year than any of the other years that I could tell were the bonfire permits. And what happens is everybody wants to have a beach bonfire, but they don't want to go through the South Walton Fire District, and so they don't use the big can. They don't follow the proper procedures. Instead of pouring water over it, they just kind of bury it in the sand, and then people find it the next morning. And so I might slightly have an issue with just the last part of that about the beach, the special events permit process working so well, because the beach bonfire, although the fire district does a great job, and I think code enforcement tries to do a great job, people see somebody with a legally permitted bonfire and they think that's a great idea, I want a bonfire too, and they don't go through the permitting process or follow all the safety procedures and things like that. So the next question is, same question as 3A. Okay, I'm not sure. Okay. As far as can be seen, special events coordinators and caterers overall have been abiding by the Leave No Trace ordinance, so how will disallowing prepared and packaged food make this beneficial? And then the following question, that is, will visitors not be allowed to bring chips on the beach or snacks for their children?
During the year, we recognized that the special events permits that were being received, really, they're not special events permits, they were simply bonfire permits. They had morphed into catering events, in particular shrimp boils, and the ordinance specifically says no vending of food on the beach. So after research with legal department, mainly spurred on by a particular vendor who had received a citation and didn't feel they were treated fairly, we went through the process, and it was determined that there would be some changes to the special events permit, which is separate than the burn or South Walton Fire District burn permit. Once again, it's not associated with the leave no trace ordinance. Special event and bonfire permits are really for two items that aren't allowed on the beach. And the leave no trace is only if you do not clean up after yourself and leave your burn barrel or your burn remnants on the beach, or a tent or chairs or whatever you had at your special event.
When a special events vendor is fined, does that come before the code board, or do we wait until their fines reach $500? Does the vendor continue to be allowed access to the beach for their business after they have reached $500 in fines and gone before the code board?
When we issue citations, the citations are issued as a civil citation. The civil citation states on the back of it that the violator has 10 days to either pay the citation or submit in writing that they want to challenge that citation. So if they challenge the citation, it does not go to the code board, it goes to the county court, which Judge Green has been hearing those. The civil citations never go through the code board, they go directly to the judge. So after the 5th violation, then it's out of our hands as the code enforcement officer, it goes to the administrative level. So what happens in administration, I can't tell you that. So.
But I think the question was, are they still allowed to vend? What's happening during that process? They're still vending, pretty much?
If we issue them a citation today, then they're vending tomorrow. They can go right on up until that 5th violation. Currently, we've not had that issue. We've not had anybody challenge the 5th one, or we've not had the 5th one that come back. Now, the whole 5-strike rule, I don't know where it's written. So,
Jeff, excuse me.
Okay, thanks.
I'm sorry, Cindy. Jeff, if you cite them,
yes, sir.
and they challenge it, it goes to the county court judge.
Yes, sir.
And it has to be docketed for a hearing.
Right.
Which could be up to 30 days,
yes,
maybe
sir.
longer. And during that time, that 30, 45 days, they are still allowed to vend. And if you cite them again, they can continue to do that by proffering it to the court.
Right.
So technically, they could have 4 violations that would, based on the court docket, may take 6 months to get it all heard, which the season is over with.
Right.
Okay. Is there currently a 5-strike rule in the leave no trace ordinance? Since revocation is a severe decision, shouldn't that be decided by the code board or administration and not the TDC code officers?
Yeah, as far as the revocation, that's above our pay grade. We observe the violations, issue the violations. If we issue citations on them, we issue citations on them. When it gets to 5-strike, then it leaves us and goes to admin. So.
Current ordinance reads that revocation is by administrative hearing. We assume that to be by the county administrator or board of county commissioners in a special session.
But we could have a vendor with 5 strikes, 4 or 5 citations that are being adjudicated through the court, and admin at the 5th one decides to revocate without adjudication of the previous violations. So how do you overcome something like that? It's still in question as to whether or not there is a violation by the court.
Well, as I say, currently we've not had that issue. However, if we write the field citation, they just pay all 5 citations because they're wrong, they're playing the system or whatever, then it's never been heard by the judge. It don't go to the judge unless they challenge it.
That's what I mean.
So if we can write them 5 tickets, and on the 5th ticket, then we let our chain of command know, and then it goes, then they're notified. It may not ever go to court. It just goes straight to admin.
Okay, and I understand it's never happened before as far as having the 5 strikes and it going through the court system. It's basically they taking care of it at the time they get the citation or shortly thereafter. But I'm just thinking, what is the remedy if you do have that vendor that elects to take it to the hilt, take it to the court, and he's got 5? I'm wondering how admin can revoke without adjudication of the previous violations.
I would think that you would have to put it on hold until the court made a determination if the defendant was either guilty or not guilty, and then at that point, depending on that outcome, you would say he has 5 strikes or he does not have 5 strikes.
Okay, Sid, I'm not asking for a reply, obviously. Okay, thank you.
I think we finished that sheet, right? Okay. What are we trying to accomplish by the revisions of this ordinance, and what are the actual problems? And I'll start out, and then I'll let everybody, the other 2 members of the panel, answer. We discussed potential revisions prior to last summer, but we didn't, the Board of County Commissioners didn't act any, and we didn't, it wasn't such a big problem in 2013. I think in 2014, it was a huge problem, not just for us in code enforcement and the TDC, but for the county commissioners. I think you received a lot of emails, a lot of phone calls. I know we did. We had people come to the office making complaints. The complaints primarily were, I get down there at 9 o'clock in the morning and there's vendor chairs set up across the entire front and they're right on the water's edge. Or I got down there early the second day and they crowded around me and tried to intimidate me, intimidation by vendors, to move my chairs and my umbrella, and my little kids crying, and so I finally acquiesced and moved back. That was an actual complaint. You can laugh, but that was an actual complaint. Or we have vendor conflicts where in a public beach setting, there's limited amount of public space, and they both want to try to get there. We have complaints from homeowners adjacent to public beach accesses, particularly the smaller neighborhood beach accesses, but also I think at Ed Walton, one of the regional beach accesses, where there wasn't enough space for all their customers, so vendors went over in front of private property. And of course, the ordinances require that the upland private property owner approve a vendor operating seaward of their house. And that permission, in some cases, was not given, but the setups were put out. We had numerous violations where, go ahead.
I'm sorry.
No, if you want to add something. We had other violations where vendors were clearly setting up too early. I even observed, when I'm going out at 6 o'clock in the morning to watch vendors set up down on the eastern end of 30A, you know it's getting to be a problem. And I had to do that just to verify for myself that, yes, this is happening. People setting up before Turtle Watch, because you get these cross complaints that Turtle walked by and said it's okay, and then they turned around and took pictures. And I'm not saying that didn't happen. I don't know. I wasn't there. But the days I was out there early in the morning, the vendors were setting up at 6 o'clock in the morning, which is in violation of the ordinance. And they hadn't received their text. Setting up at 6 actually would be within the law or within the ordinance if they had received the text message from Turtle Watch that section had been cleared. So there were numerous outcries. We also had more leave no trace violations. Some of the pictures and some of the stuff left on the beach, and I know y'all got some of the emails also, and there just was a general consensus, at least my understanding, there was a general consensus among the Board of County Commissioners that the current plan was not working and that some changes needed to be made. And that's when you all tasked us unanimously to come back with some proposed and recommended changes. So that's what I see as some of the issues and some of the violations that we had, but I wasn't down there every day like Jeff or Brian, so I'll defer to them.
Jim explained it pretty good. We received a lot of complaints, email, phone, on the beach. I too was out on the beach early. Based on the complaints I was getting, I wanted to see for myself instead of just taking somebody's word. I understand that people get emotional. They think the problem might be bigger than what it really is. So I took my time to check it out as well. There is a problem on the public beaches, in particular the regional beach accesses. And that is the reason why this came about. You asked us for recommendations. This is a start. We compiled these list of recommendations based on observations from input from the postseason vendor meeting and from conversations that I had with a lot of the vendors in person in my office after asking them to come to meet with me to discuss the issues. At the beginning of the season, I made a statement to a lot of the vendors that you need to regulate yourselves because what's happening on our public beaches is getting out of hand. There's confrontations between, like Jim said, between beach vendors, between beach visitors and beach vendors, between locals and beach vendors. And the public beaches became somewhat chaotic, and for the first time, I believe we received complaints of people stating they're not coming back. Never before have I heard that in Walton County. So, the next, you want to answer?
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you, sir. Of why, what we're trying to accomplish with revisions to the ordinance?
Yeah, so far as the beach vendors go, I mean, it's pretty well been, it's gonna be the stuff on the beach overnight, which is far less this summer than it was the summer prior, and I'll commend them for that. And then the lining up the beaches, I mean, it's not uncommon to drive up to almost any beach access and it be an entire line of chairs across there. However, providing the service to the citizens or the visitors is totally on the up and up, and I don't have an issue with that, but the ghost sets is something that we have a lot of issues with, where you'll see the same 4 empty chairs by the same vendor on the same accesses for a week or two, and at least half of them stay empty. So that's the biggest issue we've got with it.
Could I make a comment? Coming on as a new commissioner, I wanted to get in the loop and find out what our complaints are. So I asked you, Jim, to send me all the complaints. This is the complaints. Out of this book, there's 8 complainants. Some of them are Turtle Watch as far as vendors setting up at a certain time. The main issue that I see is the dummy chairs that are being set up that are not being rented. And what vendors are doing is going out, setting these up, and I've had discussion, and if we could enforce that, then that would alleviate a lot of the problems. I'm sitting here wondering, how in the world are we going to enforce aisles and chairs a certain way if we can't even enforce the people that are putting these chairs out that aren't rented? So my problem with any ordinance is that we have to be able to enforce it. And we don't need ordinances on the books that we can't enforce. So I just want us to be cognizant of that issue when we're making our decisions, that we need to be able to enforce, and we don't have money to hire a bunch more people to enforce. So we need to be thinking about, if we could solve the problem, if vendors would quit putting out stuff that's not rented, we wouldn't have all these issues today. That's just my opinion.
Yes, ma'am.
I tend to agree with you on that as well, but one of the complaints I got, or more than one time last year, because we were sent emails and phone calls, and I got a lot of phone calls, was that and that a lot of the beach vendors, somebody rented a house off the beach, they got down there at 6 o'clock and put their little umbrella up and their little metal folding beach chair like I use, and the beach vendors would come along and take them and throw them aside and put up their chairs. Now, that is not, that just cannot be tolerated. The person that brings their own chair down there has just as much right to sit on that beach. I mean, there's, we haven't passed an ordinance that you can't have a chair on the beach unless you rent one. So, I mean, there are a number of problems that the beach vendors need to solve within themselves. And maybe this it will start to bring you all together for a common goal rather than fighting each other. And maybe one of the problems is, and I don't know, is that they use teenagers. And, teenagers kind of sometimes get hot-headed and out of hand, but it is the duty and responsibility of the owner of that company, if they get a complaint on one of those kids, to make sure they understand, and at the same time that kid doesn't have a job. Because I'm sure there are enough kids out there that want a job that, so, and I think that may be part of it, is you're using young people to do this, and then they get maybe in an adversarial role out there. Well, I'm going to put my chair out before Fred does. Well, we're going to, and that's where some of the confrontation is coming in. It's between teenagers, as much as anything.
And it's also college students that are trying to make summer money to pay their way through school. So I
still call them teenagers, yeah.
Well, it's...
Commissioner Meadows?
Yeah, one of the things is the question that Commissioner Jones posed is, how do you control, if we have an ordinance you can't control? The reason that I think that one of the proposals is that Walton County / TDC actually hire the vendors to vend on public beaches, on the regional beaches, is because the working relationship, then the county has control. If they don't perform, if they don't set them up like we say, then we have some control over that. Right now, poor Jeff and those guys are out there running up and down the beach as fast as they can and trying to cover all the bases. And it is chaos out there in the summertime. I live 2 blocks from the beach. I get, my district includes all the beaches. So our office gets, and a young lady out there shaking her head no, and I don't know why you're shaking your head no, because District 5 includes all the beaches. You can look at the map. We get our office, because we are the beach commissioner. During the summertime, the majority of our calls are people upset. Yes, some people calling saying they're not coming back. I think there was an incident over at Grayton Beach this summer where somebody pulled a knife out and got taken to jail. I mean, that's how volatile this situation has gotten. And I'm surprised somebody hadn't been, I'm surprised there aren't more fights out there, because people are fist fighting over locations on the beach. So the idea that, unfortunately, that now we have to step in and set some parameters and say, this is what's got to happen because a group of people couldn't and didn't follow the rules is a shame. But it is what it is, and this is the reality that we're dealing with. So that is why I think that if you can control who works for you and you're paying them, they're making money, you can resolve, I think, 90% of the issues on the regional beach accesses, which include almost less than 8 acres of the total, I think 150-something acres of beachfront that's in Walton County. I mean, it's less than 5% of the area.
Commander?
Yeah, I need some clarification on the neighborhood beach accesses.
Yes, ma'am.
For example, every year that I can, my older daughter comes down from Iowa and we rent a beach, beach house, usually off of the beach. And sometimes they're in these neighborhood. I understand and probably agree with, we don't need vendors just going and setting up and speculating that they're going to get somebody. But if I'm renting a house off the beach and I call XYZ vending and say, would you set me up a chair Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, is that being permitted, or are you saying none whatsoever on neighborhood beaches?
No, ma'am. If you're renting a piece of private property on the beach,
Yeah.
and you call a beach vendor that has a delivery permit, he can bring those chairs and umbrellas to you and set them up. If he accesses down the neighborhood beach access and traverses over 3 lots to get to your lot, there's no reason why he can't do that. Or he can come down your boardwalk. And
No,
set up.
I'm talking about, a lot of the neighborhood beach accesses have, trails to the beach. Okay, I'm renting a house.
I'm sorry.
I'm renting a house back in the
Misunderstood the
neighborhood.
question.
Yeah.
The current ordinance reads that a beach vendor must have the upland properties permission to vend on that portion of the beach seaward of that property.
Okay.
So if you have that, then that's not a problem.
Let me make sure I'm understanding. Seagrove Beach, Eastern Lake is not a regional access, is that right? Would that be considered a neighborhood?
Yes, ma'am.
That's
Okay,
neighborhood, yes,
now,
ma'am.
when I go to Seagrove Beach, now just get this picture, I have 2 grandkids, I have coolers, I have all kinds of stuff. First thing I'm gonna do when I get down there is call some vendor to bring me a chair and umbrella. And would be so hard if we closed those. I mean, that's just my comment.
You're referring to Seagrove Beach and Seagrove 1, the...
Eastern Lake.
Oh, Eastern Lake.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
I mean, you go across the boardwalk and sometimes you go across the lake and you have all the stuff. Sometimes I've taken a boat and put all the stuff in it. But yet when I still get there, I don't have chair and umbrella. I don't, want to sit on the sand. So, I mean, it would put a hardship on those of us that want that kind of thing, so.
But I,
And it's,
Mr. Bagby?
thank you, Mr. Chairman. We agree with everything all of you said. If you want to do the Eastern Lake access, there are a couple of neighborhood beach accesses. The one that we're proposing at Walton Dunes is wide enough. The one at Eastern Lake's probably wide enough, but most of the 62 or whatever are, 10 feet wide. Those, and you can pick and choose and say, we just said regional beach accesses because that was simple and it was easy for us to categorize. We agree that, yes, all the complaints that y'all got last summer, only 64 of them from 6 complainants were written emails. But I think everybody knows that there were a lot. I mean, every day I would come in with the little blinking light, and the messages were, complaints about somebody on the beach, or Brian calling me, did you see this one, or whatever. And so we're not saying, we don't have the solution. We just put a mark on the wall and said, okay, here's some recommendations. Up them, lower them, widen them, neck them down. I'm going to violate my own protocol because this question just came in, but it said, what if empty beach chairs must be filled or picked up by 11 a.m. to alleviate empty chairs filling the beach? I would probably say 10, but whatever y'all say is what we're going to do. But there are 100 different solutions to the problems we faced last summer. We've done what you asked us to do to make recommendations. If you want to, and it spans everything. We've brought you the spectrum. No vending on public beaches at all. You want to control all the problems with public vending, then you can go that way. Somewhere in the middle, we think is where the answer is, but we're looking for guidance as much as just making recommendations. So we agree, and yes, you ought to have the ability. Maybe Santa Clara. That's a public beach access in Seagrove, so maybe that vending is allowed there. We're looking to the board to tell us what the answer is. We're just doing exactly what you ask us to do, which is bring you recommendations. If there's no more questions, we'll get back to these questions. How many vendors were there in Walton County in 2013?
I'm going to defer to the planning department. Letitia, Carrie?
33, I think in 2013. In 2014, it was 43.
Okay. And I'm not sure I understand this question, but what do you consider ambiguous issues? And I'm not sure. Do you have an answer?
I believe that refers to comments that I've made of the code having some ambiguous verbiage in it.
Yeah.
One in particular is it does have verbiage of there should be access aisles for people to gain access to the water's edge. It doesn't say how wide the access aisle is, how many access aisles there needs to be, and a certain number of feet of beach. And that's one in particular. There are several other areas where I do believe the intent was there when the code was written. The actual mechanics of how you enforce that code on the beach is a different story. Like say, it says you're supposed to leave an access aisle. If beach vendor A leaves an access aisle and beach vendor B comes down and sets up in that access aisle, who didn't leave the access aisle? So there are several areas where there's some ambiguity or lack of clarification in the code. I don't think it was intentional. I think it was purely not understanding how exactly it would be enforced on the beach, or how the people that are in violation of the code are breaking that code.
In comparison to the number of visitors in 2014, what is the percentage of complaints? In other words, we received 128 pages of complaints from 8 complainants, but if there were 2 million visitors, those 8 complainants would only amount to 0.000004%. Will we be revising all our ordinances based on such low percentages? Again, the 64 written email complaints, because we didn't have an effective tracking system, do not represent, I wouldn't even say they represent a half, maybe not even 10, because like I said, every day we got calls, and every day people came to, not every day people came to my office, but every week somebody would come to my office to complain, want to see me, to complain about what was going on down on the beach. I can't speak for the other commissioners. I don't know if they got all the same phone calls. I don't know if they got as many people visiting their offices, but without a good system, which we're trying to get in place, it's hard to say the number of complainants. Will we be revising all our ordinances based on such low percentages? That's a board's decision on any revisions you want to make to the ordinances. So I don't think we're in a position to answer that. What are the percentages of complaints of the beaches overall, not just beach vendors? There were complaints by beach vendors about Turtle Watch. Typically, those were counter complaints where the Turtle Watch folks made a complaint that somebody was setting up early, and when the beach vendor, and I'll let Brian and Jeff talk to the beach vendors, but my memory is then the beach vendor would say, well, they walked by and they gave me a thumbs up, or they waved, or they said okay, or whatever, so I started setting up, or my guys started setting up, and then they turned around and they made a complaint about us. But I can't remember there were leave no trace complaints, obviously, which did not involve vendors. There were a lot of those. I don't know if Jeff has the numbers, but I'll defer to you guys.
I don't have the numbers as far as leave no trace or complaints, but we're wrapped around the vendor process, and I understand that because that's the hot topic, but don't forget the glass and dogs and all of that kind of stuff that goes along with it. That's probably tenfold what the complaints are we deal with vendors on a daily basis, because we self-initiate a lot of that stuff, but then until we get the phone calls and the notifications from the sheriff's office or the beach vendors that there's glass in here, the lifeguards that there's glass or there's dogs, and the lady's here every day and her dog's running loose and bothering our visitors and that kind of stuff. So in the grand scheme of things, as far as personal contacts every day, there's probably a lot more glass dog issues than it is vendor issues. Don't have a number on top of it.
I got a question for Chief Talbert, since he's standing over there. Chief, the lifeguard stations that you got stationed along the beach, do you have issues with vendors setting up sets in front of your lifeguard stations where they don't have a direct access to the Gulf?
Thank you, Commissioner. Yes, we had that happen. There were isolated incidents, but they happened this year in the 2014 season, where there was enough of a crowd in particular areas where we had lifeguard towers, where we we had to ask the vendors and contact, I believe, the sheriff's department to have some chairs and some umbrellas moved where it was within a line of sight where our guards cannot see the patrollable area that we're required to be able to accomplish. And a step further, we probably needed to do it anyway, but we've had to delineate with cones and some other barriers areas in front of our tower so we can get where we have jet skis, our four-wheelers, rescue boards, and the like to make sure we have quick access to the water.
Did you get voluntary compliance whenever you asked them to remove them, or did you have to get the SO involved?
I believe we had to get the SO involved at least once. Our beach safety director is somewhere in the building. I can track him down to verify that. But
that's all right.
I believe we did have at least one instance where we had to.
Okay, I think question 7 is very similar to question 5, so I'll go to 8. What resources have become limited as mentioned in the introduction? What conditions have changed, and accommodate all means whom?
The resources are limited, or of course our code enforcement resources. Currently we have 2 code enforcement officers to patrol the beach, 1 beach ambassador whose role is to educate for voluntary compliance. She doesn't have a certification and is not capable of writing citations. The things that have changed are we saw an increase in visitors and we saw an increase in beach vendors on our public beaches. That came together to create congestion and, of course, the problems that come with congestion on the public beaches.
Okay. Proposed revisions to the beach activities ordinance. Do you believe it's possible to have no regulations on the beach? I guess the easy answer is sure. If that's what the Board of County Commissioners decides, might ask you to approve carry permits for the code guys if you did that, but that is a possibility. That's an option, and I don't. The beach activities ordinance, at least the last revision, is not that old, so I can't remember. And I know whatever it was, we enforced on the eastern end of 38, but we didn't have beach code enforcement 4 years ago, other than whatever support the street side code personnel provided. So is it possible? It probably is possible. It wouldn't be my recommendation. I don't know. I'll let Brian and Jeff speak for themselves.
My answer is no. You have to have some kind of regulation on any public spaces.
Jeff, you want to say anything? You're the enforcer. Okay. Won't banning vendors adversely affect the visitors who request recommendations of beach vendors through their property management companies throughout the season? And I'll take the initial stab at that one. Most of the vendors are not down there, and most of the vendors are college kids earning money during the summer or high school kids. So the notion that all the beach vendors, I wish they were all great ambassadors and knew all the great places to eat and could tell you the best shrimp place and the best place to get cobia and the best place to have some mahi and who has the best sandwich and who has the best Bloody Mary. And that would be a perfect world. It'd be like one big resort. But having worked with beach guys and some great beach guys for a long time, you get kind of a mishmash. So I think the relying on them to be our primary source of recommendations, I'm not sure that's I'm not sure we want to ride that horse necessarily as I think they can be. I think we're working on a certified tourism ambassador program with Visit Florida to get as many vendors and restaurateurs and bike service folks and short-term rental folks certified so that they can give good customer service and be good tourism ambassadors for the destination. But And hopefully we'll get some of these beach folks to do that too, or some of the beach vendors to do that. And won't it also adversely affect the visitors who have an established business relationship with local vendors and continue visiting our beaches because of those relationships?
I don't believe it's going to adversely affect it at all. Once again, there's the ability to still delivery vend. We're not taking that completely away, simply trying to regulate it at the regional beach accesses. Neighborhood beach accesses, the current code we have really doesn't allow them to vend in front of other people's property unless they have that written authorization. And if they have that, then there's no problem, and they're not in violation of the code. And there more than likely is not a complaint being filed against them because the people that own the property want them there. The people that rent the property want them there. And so I don't believe there's going to be any relationships adversely affected.
Why should there be no beach vending or neighborhood beach accesses if the visitors are requesting the services through their property management companies and/or through established association with the vendor? Note, I, for one, want to be able to rent a chair at a neighborhood beach access.
It's the same answer to the question previous. Once again, if you're renting property that has beachfront in front of it, you're able to call any vendor you'd like, preferred or not preferred, or and if you're not, the code already says that you can't set up a chair in front of somebody else's property. The neighborhood beach accesses are 10 feet wide, most of them. Some of them are a little bit wider. Some of them do have what is considered, or what is county-owned property, beach property. There are certain locations on the beach where the upland property owner's southern boundary is at the toe of the dune versus the majority of them being at the main high water line. But if you come down neighborhood beach access, to fully be in compliance with the code, you would have to vend, you have to set up your chair on that 10-foot wide piece of property or easement or whatever its status is. To filter out east and west means that you're either in violation of the code already or you have the right to be there because the upland property has given you that permission.
Wouldn't only 1 to 5 beach vendors for the entire county overtax those vendors and not provide quality service to our visitors?
Once again, we're not saying it's 1 to 5 vendors for the whole county. It's simply for the regional beach accesses, which we have already determined make up 5% of the available beach in Walton County.
What if we required a bidding process? The bidder/vendor must be an established Walton County business. No vendor will win a bid on more than one beach access. Tourists want the chairs and umbrellas, especially in neighborhood accesses, and bundle low-traffic neighborhood accesses for vending purposes.
I see what the person is saying. If you're doing business in Walton County, I believe the county has provisions for a occupational type license. No? Certificate of use? The
Certificate of use.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, they have to get a permit.
No vendor will win more than one bid on one beach access. That's a suggestion that we would entertain. Like I say, the purpose of tonight is a workshop to present the recommendations that we have generated, to take input from the public, and then come back to you with a compilation of all this information and ask you to make a decision on it. So, like I say, these items can and will be incorporated into the final document. Tourists want the chairs and umbrellas, especially in neighborhood accesses. I don't know if that's a correct statement or not. A lot of people that rent second and third tier or north of 30A can't afford to be on the beach, and more than likely are the type of person that will bring their own chairs and umbrellas, or not use a chair and umbrella, simply a towel or a bamboo mat. Bundle low traffic neighborhood accesses for vending purposes. That's not a bad idea. let's segment up or bundle together some of the neighborhood beach accesses, the ones that do have room available for public setup without having to impose on the neighboring private property. Like I say, that's a good idea, and I'm all for it if we identify the areas where it's available.
And one of the things that we did discuss as we were formulating the options based on the inputs that we got was divide the county up in 3 to 5 segments, and all the beach accesses, neighborhood and regional, in segment A, say east of Water Sound Parkway, would fall under one vendor, and all the public beach accesses from there to maybe Seagrove or someplace would fall under another one. Part of the problem that does not address is then if that vendor on a neighborhood beach access that is, say it's even 20 feet wide, so you can get 2.5 setups on the front row. Once they put those 3 setups right there on the front row of that neighborhood beach access at 7 o'clock or 7:30 or 8 o'clock or whatever time, then everybody else that's using that neighborhood beach access can't use it, particularly, as the commissioners pointed out before, if they don't come and sit in that chair, if there's nobody sitting in that chair sometimes all day because they've rented it for a week, sometimes till 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And so it's especially, the problems we have are especially exacerbated when you have those very narrow neighborhood beach accesses. And that's why in the final proposal recommendations we gave you was just pull out the neighborhood beach accesses, because some of them, you set up one beach umbrella and 2 chairs and a table, and that's the width of the neighborhood beach access pretty much. And so, and then you put 3 of those in a row. So I come down at 9 o'clock in the morning thinking I'm getting down to the beach early, and I find out that I'm in the 4th row of this neighborhood beach access. Tensions are going to, or the second morning, I get up and I get down there before the beach vendor, and then they move my stuff or whatever. It just becomes a problem. Why would requiring costly corporation, LLC, sole doing business as for public beach vending benefit Walton County visitors and or Walton County? Note, government should not be trying to do this, as it is not our role.
Corporations and LLC don't have to be costly. I don't know the average going rate. I actually set up mine for $100. Sole DBA, I believe it's a fee you have to pay to the state to do business as a DBA. It's not something that we set, but all business entities ought to have some sort of business structure, be it a corporation, LLC, or DBA. They have to have it for filing tax purposes, be it payroll taxes or corporate income tax and all that.
Brian, it also protects the business owner from liability. Like
Yes,
if you have
ma'am.
an LLC or a corporation, you're personally, if something happens to somebody and it's your vendor's fault,
I agree that
so it makes
yeah.
good business sense.
Next question is, why would it be necessary to acquire employee rosters, and wouldn't this be considered overregulation in socialism?
Standard common practice in government business. If you do any work with federal government or state government, they require certified payrolls. And this insertion as a revision is really an attempt to make sure that the county is covered properly under the vendor's liability insurance. Currently, it is my understanding that some companies employ people under the 1099 process. In other words, contract labor. They don't require general liability insurance or workman's comp insurance from them. It really puts that employee or that person at a huge risk if they become hurt on the job because they're not covered by workman's comp, and if that person happens to damage or hurt something or someone under that employer's umbrella, then the employer is responsible for that. So really, the attempt or the insertion of the roster is first to identify that they have employees and who their employees are. Certified payroll means that they've kept them as employees and that they're operating as a bona fide business that first protects them and also protects the county. The way that this should be administrated currently is if the business comes in and applies for a permit, they have to prove general liability insurance policy. Depending on their business structure, they have the opportunity to be exempt from workers' comp through the state of Florida. But we do not, or the permitting authority does not seek or acquire secondary or sub general liability policies. So, like I say, this verbiage is really an attempt to make sure the county's covered, and almost by default that the owner of the company has covered himself.
Again, we answered the certified payroll question. Why do we need this information? Do we require this of property management companies, and are we trying to regulate what locals are on the beach and where? Before I turn it over to Brian to answer, there's a significant difference in this is public property. Okay, our recommendations are trying to protect the county and use the Board of County Commissioners, not some private homeowner who's using a rental management company, but the ones that I am aware of that use rental management companies make sure that the people are either licensed, bonded, insured, because they understand that when that person gets in their home and has an accident, that if they're not, then they are liable also. So I'll let Brian and Jeff answer the rest of the question, but there's a significant difference. If we were dealing with private property, we might make different recommendations, but we are dealing with public property entrusted to the public trust, entrusted to the county, and to use the Board of County Commissioners.
I have nothing to add.
Okay, does Walton County and the TDC require all companies doing business in Walton County to have insurance? We require all companies doing business for us to have insurance. I believe the same is true on the admin side. So any business doing business for the public, the government, is required to have insurance. And so I guess the short answer to that question is yes. Don't all of the current vendors have their name on their product? If not, how does it benefit Walton County and TDC to know? If it's left with no name on it, wouldn't the product revert to the leave no trace ordinance?
Yeah, the benefit to us is we know who to call and say, you left your stuff on the beach overnight. For example, there's probably junior 25 or 30 sets that we pulled off the beach overnight. We have no idea who they are. Nobody's called, nobody's came, nobody's said, hey, I'm missing my stuff. So it's to our advantage to know who to contact to say, hey, we found your stuff washed up after a storm, or we picked your stuff up last night, and we generally at 3 o'clock in the morning we'll call them and say, hey, you got your stuff on the beach, you want to come get it? You want me to get it? And give them the opportunity to say, hey, yeah, sorry, messed up, we'll come get it or whatnot. So if we know whose it is, then we know who to call. So.
Okay, hold the microphone. This one's, I'm sorry. Yeah. Why is it necessary to remove the equipment from the designated storage areas daily? How many vendors violated the designated storage areas in 2014? And how many citations were issued to vendors for product left on the beach?
As far as, I don't know what a designated storage area, I'm saying is the vendor box or somebody that's got a site-specific location and they're permitted to leave their stuff on the beach. They don't have to take their stuff out of that box. They don't have to move it from where it's at. If the beach vendor's putting 4 sets on a public beach access or 10 sets on a public beach access and they're moving to the toe of the dune every day, then we don't have an issue with that, but what happens on the public beach access locations is over the course of 2 or 3 weeks, and you got a stack of 8 or 10 chairs at the bottom of the boardwalk, and there's only 2 chairs that's set up in use. So then they start stockpiling their stuff on either side of the public access, which creates not the most pictorial background to take pictures and that kind of stuff when you got stacks of vendor chairs that's around the dunes when they got 2 or 3 there. So kind of 2 different questions, 2 different answers there. But how many vendors violated the designated storage areas in 2014? I don't have that number in the top of my head. I mean, for the most part, the biggest issue we had with that is a box turned the wrong direction, or a stack of chairs 4 or 5 stacks wide or 15 or 20 stacks long, which goes to another question that I had right here was what are the storage boxes limited to 4 foot wide by 4 foot by 8 foot? And that goes back to the footprint that's on the beach that affects the turtle nesting habitat. So they're turned north and south, and they're only 4 foot by 8 foot, and they're in at least 10 foot increments. So that increases the turtle habitat instead of having a bunch of chairs or boxes stacked side by side by side by side.
Okay. Why does a vendor employee need to be on site when phone numbers are posted on the equipment? Well, again, not all equipment has names and or phone numbers posted on the equipment. Why no early setups if the South Walton Turtle Watch survey is completed and the volunteer gives the vendor clearance and they have an amicable working relationship? Are we not able to work together toward the same goal?
The reason is you have to have a standard set. What happens is if there is a understanding of, hey, I walked by, you can go to setting up, then it leaves room for, well, I thought that was a Turtle Watch guy or lady, they waved, so I thought it was cool to set up. If everybody has to follow the same rules, then there's no ambiguity in it, and there's no problem. It's easy to enforce.
One of the most concerning complaints was where a South Walton Turtle Watch volunteer allegedly attacked a beach vendor. Why do we not have any rules, regulations addressing these kinds of issues? I'll let. This is the little old lady, right? Okay, I'll let you address it.
We do have rules. It's called assault and battery.
It's called what?
Assault and battery.
Oh,
okay. That issue got out of hand. That had been going on that beach for several days, and it involved a tourist that was inciting the anger and anger between the 2 parties involved. And it came to a head one morning. And, unfortunately, the sheriff had to come out and produce some reports. We didn't have any more incidents after that. We took the time to talk to both parties and explain that, hey, this can't happen anymore. But, there is rules and regulations. It's called common law. And, all in all, the South Walton Turtle Watch people get out, do their job, and, routinely. I mean, we monitored the whole process last year. And there was a rare instance when they cleared the beach after 7:30. And in those cases, it typically involved moving a nest, or if unfortunately a volunteer didn't show up that morning and another volunteer had to take over that portion of beach. But I do wish that they could work together and form a better working relationship. So that's my answer to that question.
Why the rigid limitations? And I'm not sure what that actually speaks to. Is 50% staggered even realistic? Won't it look tacky and cluttered?
50% staggered is a reference to a statement I made in one of the areas of the outline. Once again, it's an attempt at a beach management plan that will be effective on a public beach. Is it the end all or what we will come up to at the end? No, it's not. But we had to have a starting point. And the starting point is we think you ought to use 50% of the beach, and we think your chairs ought to be staggered, so that it gives people that are 3rd, 4th, 5th tier up on the beach the ability to get down to the waterfront.
Does Walton County currently require all companies, including individual property owners, to provide a copy of their contracts? Is this over-regulation and socialism? If they are doing our business, that would be yes. For us, on public property, I think the answer is yes. I know, but I don't really understand the question, so.
I think it's a reference to written authorization from the upland property owner or private property owner. So
Okay.
not necessarily a copy of the contract, but written authorization that you have the right to vend on their property.
And that is a problem because we would talk to the beach vendor last year. Yeah, I got their permission, okay? And then, of course, they, being the property owner, would call and say, why are these people down in front of my house on my private property? Now, in a couple of instances, or at least one instance that I do remember, the owner who lives in a portion of their house and rents out a portion of their house, their renter had contracted with the vendor to do a setup, and so we had to go back and tell the owner, they have permission from your renter, and our understanding, checking with the lawyers, is that's sufficient as your representative to allow that permission to be down on your section of the beach. But a lot of the complaints, that was the only one that I remember that happened, but there were a lot of complaints where people just kind of spread out in front of private property owners. Why wouldn't it be necessary to acquire employee rosters? Why would it be necessary, I apologize, to acquire employee rosters, and wouldn't this be considered over-regulation and socialism? Okay. Especially on someone's private property. I think we already answered that question. Wouldn't a private property owner's insurance already cover any liabilities, especially if it is a vacation rental, hotel, condominium, etc.? And that's the point that the private property owners are making from my perspective is if we know of vending going on in front of their private property, they have not approved it, and we have allowed it, tacitly allowed it, then again, we're not doing our job of protecting the county and protecting the Board of County Commissioners from possible legal action should someone get injured down there. But I'll defer to Brian if he has a different perspective.
We're not talking about private property. We're talking about public property. My guess is, though, is if the private property owner inquired with their insurance agent as if to a third party was covered on their property that was doing business, my guess would be they would have to pay an additional premium to have that coverage. So I can't answer to it. It's a question that the property owner needs to ask their insurance carrier. But what we're referring to is public property and vending on public property.
And now we're down to about 12 minutes, so we're going to do a lightning round with the cards. We'll just go 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. We each have a stack until, and they're in the order we received them as broken down by who's going to answer. My company received 4 tickets over $1,000 for leaving equipment out overnight in every case. My worker made an honest mistake and just overlooked that stop on his list. Can I recommend a set fine amount instead of $100 increase for every ticket, with that set amount being $50 per violation? Yes, I mean, anybody can make any recommendations. We'll put it in, or we can put it as an option, or when it's a public hearing, they can come up if it doesn't make sense to us, and they can ask you to change the fine amount from $100 to $50 and not be ascending.
What percentage of complaints were made by tourists against beach vendors versus how many tourists visited the beach in 2014? I did the research, it's less than 1%, so why is the TDC trying to regulate vendors more based on it to be complaint driven? There's several different ratios that have been kicked around here. I don't know if they're all accurate. I have a few ratios myself. 12 vendors that received the majority of complaints versus 42 vendors, pretty high percentage. Number of complaints this year versus last year, fairly high percentage. So depending on which ratio you want to look at is how you base your opinion on if we're doing this complaint driven or not. We're doing it because we were asked by the Board of County Commissioners to offer recommendations on how to alleviate or minimize beach vendor issues that we experienced last year.
Jeff?
can the TDC code enforcement write a ticket to a beach vendor for leaving chairs out overnight if they were pulled out by thieves or vandals? The answer, short, yes. There's the responsibility of the vendor. However, we use officer discretion. We try to use good judgment on what we find. If the chairs sit up straight, the umbrella drilled in the middle of it, or is there drag marks from a pile or whatever. So we try to use our discretion on that, and give them the benefit of a doubt if we feel like we can prove that. So.
Is it a conflict of interest for the TDC director to have worked with beach vendors in his past job and make recommendations on beach vending changes? Actually, I think it gives me a great perspective, to be honest with you, because every problem we are facing, with the exception of pulling the knife out at Grayton Beach, I faced at Rosemary Beach. And we started out, we had basically no rules. We had a great beach service. They did what people asked them. They set up the entire length of the beach. On July 4th, they set up 2, 3, sometimes 4 rows. The length of the beach, and then the homeowners and the permanent residents complained because when they went down, there was no place for them to set up that wasn't on the 3rd or 4th row. So then we went through an iteration where we did some regulations, and we said you have to leave an opening at the end of each of the 9 boardwalks. They did that. That wasn't sufficient. Then we had to segment off the beach. So we went through all these iterations that we're going through with the beach activities ordinance. So that's up to the board to decide, but I will tell you it gives me a very good understanding because I've seen the beach service folks down there at 6 o'clock in the morning setting up because the homeowners were complaining that they got down there at 5 or 6 to set up, and then the beach guys were moving their stuff. And so like I said, every complaint that I've seen this past summer, I saw for probably not 8 of the 10 years, but for at least 5 of the 10 years. Yeah.
Why do beach service vendors get their permits through Walton County Administration, paraphrasing Planning and Development Department, but get their permits enforced by the TDC Code Enforcement? Predates me. It was set up that way, I believe, because the planning and development people have the experience in taking applications for permits. Code enforcement is obviously our function on the beach.
Is it legal for TDC code enforcement to remove chairs off of private beach property without a written warning, or legal to remove them at all? Yes, Florida Statute 162 gives the Board of County Commissioners the authority to invoke their police powers by writing ordinance. The Beach Activities Ordinance 2254G3 says, speaks to abandonment. Any property left on the beach after dark is considered abandonment, and the ordinance says that it shall be deemed abandoned and shall become the property of Walton County, which may dispose of them in accordance with statute. So, yes, we do have the authority to do that by statute and ordinance through the commissioners.
From 2012 to present, how much bed tax money was used to fund TDC code enforcement, such as salaries, vehicles, classes, and gas? A rough estimate will do. I haven't really no clue, but my rough estimate would be about $150K a year. But if Jeff has a better, or Brian has a better estimate, I'll be glad to entertain it. You're up.
I'll have to do some research to answer that question exactly. My company is workman's comp exempt and mostly uses subcontractors for labor. How will that work if TDC recommends workman's comp and a certified payroll to receive a permit? We're not recommending that the beach vending company carries workman's comp. We are staying consistent with the current ordinance that the companies that do business in Walton County have a general liability policy and are in compliance with the state laws on insurance regulations. There are provisions for primary companies to have workman's comp exemptions, and that can carry down through subs, contractors. So like I said, we're not recommending workman's comp, and the certified payroll recommendation is an attempt to be able to identify who the companies have working for them.
Jeff, how many times does or has code enforcement made visitors move from in front of private, single-family upland property? We have not, we do not. That's Florida Statute 810 governs trespass. That's enforced by the Sheriff's Office.
How do beach service vendors get the TDC to help market and educate tourists on our services like they do for other groups or entities? They can be on our websites just like bicycle vendors and anybody else that wants to, and they can put that link on. Ron, I'm trying to remember Ron's last name, but if they send me an email tomorrow, I'll send it to the marketing folks to get put on the website.
The TDC is recommending changes at public boardwalks such as no commercial chairs and umbrellas or to bid the boardwalks out. How does the TDC plan on handling the large amount of complaints from tourists when they are told they no longer can use the service they have used for 10 to 20 years, but instead may not be able to use the service at all or must use one service at a higher price? I can't anticipate how many complaints we'll receive. And once again, we're not saying they can't use that vendor. We're simply asking for the ability to manage and manage the public beaches we have and enforce the current code we have and take out the ambiguities and clarify the certain areas of the code that are hard to enforce.
You're out? There, you can have that. Trying to get rid of the duplicates here as we run out of time. I'll go ahead while Jeff's reading that question. Does the TDC director think these recommendations will help any of the beach vendors? If so, how? I do believe that they will help in some ways if we can establish, and I think this reinforces Commissioner Jones's point, if we establish regulations in the ordinance and rules that are enforceable, and that everybody understands, and we've tried to make sure everybody understood the current ordinance. We've had classes the last two, before the last two seasons, and make sure everybody understood the changes, any changes in the ordinance or any changes in process or whatever. So I do think that will help. I think if we have a time of 7:30 as opposed to 8 o'clock, I think, or sometime that y'all decide, 7 maybe, that the Turtle Watch folks and the vendor folks have felt they've had at least the opportunity to provide input on. I think that will help. I think some of the leave no trace issues will help. I think, and remember, Brian alluded to this, most of the complaints against the vendors were about a very small subset of that 42 or 43 vendors. The vast majority of vendors had minimal complaints, but the problem was we had a lot of complaints, or y'all had a lot of complaints about those vendors. And so how you choose to solve that problem and direct us to enforce, we can give you lots of ideas, but in the end, we're going to rely on y'all. And then I think the final way that it helps the vendors is it establishes a standard of performance, a standard of behavior, a standard of whatever or for those vendors, and so that they clearly understand, you violate this, you don't get to vend. Or you violate this, here's what the punishment is. And that it is enforced. We've tried to enforce the current ordinance to the best of our ability, equally, fairly. When we get a complaint, we investigate the complaint. We're no different than the other code enforcement arm of the county. And so I think it will help the vendors in that way. Jeff, Brian.
Bike vendors get to utilize bike paths and bike racks at and on public boardwalks and land. Why do bike vendors get to use these county resources without having to get a permit or be regulated, when beach vendors have to get a permit and be overregulated by the county and the TDC? I can't speak to what bike vendors have to do, but I assume that most of them are businesses, and they have a certificate of use. And a comparison would be a chair vendor bringing a chair to the top of the boardwalk and allowing the person to take the chair down on the beach. The bike vendors, I believe their business practice is they take the bikes to the rental house or condominium and drop them off, and then the person drives the bike down the bike path or onto the boardwalk or onto the bike rack.
Mr. Bagby, it's 6 o'clock. I'd like to give any of the commissioners, if they have other questions, to ask them. And I would ask them that any other unanswered questions you have there, would you be able to answer them on your website and post them for people to see?
Sure, Mr. Chairman, we'll be glad to, or,
Okay.
yes, sir.
Fellow commissioners, any questions on your part?
Just kind of refresh my memory on where we go from here. Do we have public meetings? Do we have, I would like some time with Mr. Bagby to go over my ideas of, changes and so forth. And then do we have one public meeting too, or?
Well, I would think that before it gets brought to a board meeting for public discussion, at which we will allow people to make their comments, that Mr. Bagby will have met individually with each of the commissioners to talk about the proposals and help get this thing refined. But when it gets brought to a board meeting, anyone that wants to make a comment will be allowed to make a public comment at that time.
But
Mr.
we do
Chairman,
have,
I'm sorry. Just
we
remind
we
you-
do have to watch our time because tourist season starts before too long, and I think it's imperative that we have the decision we make in place before then.
Just
Yeah,
remind
I
you that you will be dealing with an ordinance, so there's a process of how to amend an ordinance, and it would require the idea coming back to you for approval, then it would put it out for a public notice, and it would require 2 public hearings to make those amendments, so there will be ample opportunity for the public.
Any others? Again, I appreciate everyone with their patience for coming here, the questions that have been submitted, the time you've taken to make the answers, and hopefully all of these unasked questions yet will be posted on the website. Thank you very much. We're adjourned.
Okay, give me the ones that are unanswered.